Okay, I think we'll get started. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Today is a very important webinar in view of the BIMSTEC conference planned shortly in Sri Lanka. We thought it's a very important occasion for us to discuss various aspects connected to the underwater domain awareness that we are pursuing. And we have a very, very eminent panel today, both from Sri Lanka as well as from India. I think the most relevant people and people who have been in this domain for a very, very long time. And we have a good spectrum of people looking at various aspects. Ambassador Gunathilake, sir, thank you for joining us. Welcome on board, sir. So today we have Mr. Pratap Heblikar, sir, to give us the opening remarks. Heblikar, sir, retired as the Special Secretary, Government of India with over 38 years of service. He specialized in insurgency and counter-insurgency developments in the India's northeast region and its neighborhood. He had several important and sensitive posts in the central government dealing with external security-related issues. He also writes for security and defense-related journals and leading newspapers and magazines. During his association with the Government of India, he served both at home and overseas and was decorated by the Government of India for distinguished and meritorious service, respectively. He has served in Sri Lanka and has deep connect with the people and the system. Heblikar, I would request you to please take the floor, sir.
Thank you, Arnab. Good evening, my friends on the screen. It's been a great opportunity for me to be part of this event. And it's going to be a signal event which will bring together the like-minded professionals both in India and Sri Lanka to discuss and exchange views on a subject which I think is gaining importance as we go along. I will try and preface this with an expression of thanks to the Pathfinder Foundation, especially to Ambassador Gunathilake for having agreed readily to join with us on this platform and also bring to the table some of his distinguished colleagues from the Sri Lankan Navy, from the academia, and he himself has very kindly consented to be the keynote speaker today. So with these few words of opening words of mine, I would just like to take a few minutes because I think we are going to be rushed for time as we speak on many issues. Firstly, I think in the context of the Indo-India-Sri Lanka relations, I must say that the relationship is on a very strong foundation. It has grown and prospered over the years, whilst we have at times seen certain turbulence, but that also has been addressed at the appropriate levels. Today, we are in a much better frame of mind that the political leadership of the two countries has an extraordinary understanding and relationship, and it flows down to the operational level or the executive levels. So Sri Lanka, as Arnab Panda had decided, was going to be our first port of call to talk to them about underwater domain awareness, which is a new subject, and also try and see how we can deal with underwater domain awareness as not as distinct from maritime domain awareness. To me, I'm a newcomer to the underwater domain awareness subject, having dealt with things other than what is on the maritime issues. But I would like to say that the bringing together of civil and military officials, academics, business people, and a host of others, we are trying to create here an environment where we stop acting in silos. We create salience across the spectrum, where we bring traditional and non-traditional security factors to the table and to see how we can bring people together to think alike instead of sitting in our own silos. I have always been an advocate of talking to people across different areas of work, either in national security or otherwise, trying to create a larger awareness of how things ought to be done. Having served in Sri Lanka, I understand the importance Sri Lanka has in India's strategic calculus. I also understand Sri Lanka's own security outlook, and in that direction, I think the baby steps we have taken today is to create greater awareness, create an ambiance for cooperation and mutual understanding of the subject. We are happy that we are able to use our webinar today as a curtain raiser for the 25th uh, year, founding year of BIMSTEC, and this is the fifth summit which takes place on the 31st of this month. And this summit is expected to discuss a large number of subjects such as transportation, maritime issues, navigation issues, and things of that nature. And surely the subject which we are discussing today is going to be of relevance and importance. The second point also is that Sri Lanka has very recently, yesterday or day before yesterday, they had the US Under Secretary of State for Political Affairs visiting the island country, where she has, and both sides have discussed various issues, and maritime issues have also formed part of those discussions. And as I read, it has gained prominence in their activities. When we set out to undertake this webinar, we had set ourselves 3 or 4 aims and objectives. The first one was to create awareness about the underwater domain awareness, and how do we create, take it across the various other important stakeholders. The second is to look at the possibility of creating capacity building. It is very important as we get to know this subject in a more clear and cogent fashion. The third is to look at development of skills. How can we develop skills that are compatible with this new subject that we're talking about today? Last but not the least, as I say, in my own view, in India today, national security is no longer being seen in its narrow military terms. Today, we have many more stakeholders on that platform, and the coronavirus pandemic has really upended the status quo which existed in our security networks and in political governance. So today we have more areas to consider which become national security factors. For example, we did not have, say, either cyber security or terrorism becoming part of the major network, but today it's a part and parcel of it. Likewise, I think the pharmaceutical industry, your healthcare, everything now come on to the major platform of traditional national security. So I think in that connection, underwater domain awareness has a lot to gain by discussions about trying to put plans into place so that we can move things along. The other area which I am looking at is that we not only require technology, but we require investments. And we are not looking at the government by itself, but we're looking at private sector. And in this connection, I would like to think that Sanjay Vishwanathan will give us a way forward as to how the industry sees this and what is it that we need to look at making underwater domain awareness a much more simpler task in our networks. My understanding is underwater domain awareness also includes areas of managing ports, how to look at ports as smart ports, how to create the new infrastructure in the minds of people who man the ports, security. We have not one agency in India which looks after security. We have customs who have their preventive wings looking after security. You have the Central Industrial Security Force. You have 9 states which have coastal responsibility. So I think underwater domain awareness is becoming more and more important for us. But I'm not taking the military part of it, but I'm sure that some of my colleagues on the event will tell us what they think and how we go about it. So I feel that having made this start by ourselves, where Arnab and I have collaborated on a few events in India itself, and we have tried to bring underwater domain awareness to the center of discussion. And as Arnav mentioned to me, he has had a word with the newly appointed National Maritime Security Coordinator, and the response received from the Admiral there has been very, very positive. And I think will probably be able to increase our reach to other stakeholders. The, the point that we are making is that we will like to look at it from an India-Sri Lanka initiative, and this initiative because Sri Lanka's own experience to take it to other BIMSTEC countries. And I think at that point of time, it is very important that both India and Sri Lanka understand each other. We have a roadmap which we create for ourselves, and we use this particular platform to engage with other countries like Bangladesh, Thailand, Myanmar, and others that will be very useful to us. I think with these few words, I would like to end here because strategic outlook is so important that even in India today, maritime security has been accorded the highest priority by our Honorable Prime Minister. And I think we need to look at it. How do we not only venture on this voyage by ourselves, but we also take others along with us? And the Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean region is going to be an important area for our underwater domain awareness platform to become important. Thank you very much for your patience and time, and back to you, Arnab.
Thank you so much, sir. It's definitely a good start given by you, sir, and always appreciate your continued support in taking forward the underwater domain awareness framework. I want to welcome Admiral Ravinder Vijayaratne sir for joining us, Ambassador Gurjeet Singh sir for joining us, and HP Rajan sir for joining us as panelists. And going forward, I would like to make a brief presentation on what this UDA framework is and how it can be a catalyst for the entire BIMSTEC and the Indo-Sri Lankan relations. Now, the underwater domain awareness framework, as you can probably appreciate, is taking us more towards the digital ocean. And I'll try and cover under these heads today. Now, in the 21st century and probably the new global order, we can see the larger maritime interactions have got limited to the tropical waters. I mean, there was a time when the temperate and the polar waters were the strategically important regions. But today, largely the interactions are happening in the tropical waters. But it is important for us to appreciate that there is a very, very unique political, economic, military, and physical aspect that needs to be understood going forward. I mean, many times we just try and import the technology and the know-how from the West, but it is very important for us to understand that that is not valid or it doesn't work in our waters. And many times we go wrong in that sense. And it's, I think, well known the Indo-Pacific strategic construct has become the most important strategic forum. And the very definition of the Indo-Pacific is the tropical waters of the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. So again, there is a significant emphasis required for us to appreciate what this tropical waters mean. Now, coming to the BIMSTEC, it's a very, very unique construct. If you look at it, it's almost close to 1/4 of the world population which resides in this region. And they are definitely not very developed, and there is a lot more to be done in terms of the economic development and prosperity. And that also brings a lot of interference from the extra-regional powers. So it's very important that this region comes together and puts in a lot of effort for indigenous development and more site-specific understanding of their own conditions. The import of know-how or import of technology is not going to help us. And if you just look at the 6 focus areas, trade, technology, energy, transport, tourism, and fisheries, it's going to largely come from the underwater domain. Now, if you just look at this map, the top part of it, I mean, when we consider the 4 nations, Nepal, Bhutan, India, Bangladesh, and probably Myanmar also can be part of it. I mean, the freshwater systems, I mean, the northeast of India is blessed with water. But I think this region also has some very, very unique challenges which needs to be addressed. I mean, I come from Assam. I can talk about the Brahmaputra River. It is something which people have really not understood. I mean, who only people who understand Brahmaputra can probably contribute to any kind of strategic vision or any kind of operational aspects. So it's very important that we understand the underwater part of it, and the rest of it is, of course, we are connected by the ocean. So we have to probably give far more importance to the underwater domain awareness if at all we want to come together. And these countries are also kind of uh, criticized for being so fragmented. I mean, this is one of the probably the biggest bay globally, but we have not been able to leverage this at all. Now, going forward, if you just look at the Indian Ocean region, the position of India and Sri Lanka, I think, is absolutely unique. And if India and Sri Lanka can come together and take things forward, there can be no better solution. I mean, you can just look at the way we are positioned in the Indian Ocean, and probably coming together, there is no alternative to that. But there are concerns. I mean, if you look at today, there have been a lot of definitely strategic outlook or strategic intent is very clear. The Honorable Prime Minister of India has declared the Sagar vision. He's extremely keen that the maritime potential has to be leveraged. The maritime has to be given far more. I mean, in the Indian Navy, we used to say we have a sea blind approach, but I think a lot of it has been taken care. But the on ground or the bottom level capacity building has to be taken up to a very different level. And we can see with the increasing maritime activities, a lot of concerns for the sustainability is also increasing. You can see these strandings that are becoming more and more common. I mean, these blue whales or the bright whales or the big whales, as we call them, should not be seen north of Sri Lanka. But now we are seeing strandings even close to the Maharashtra coast. So, I mean, we'll not go into the reasons of it. I've written extensively on this aspect. The acoustic habitat degradation is a very, very important area. I mean, when we talk about development, this is something we have to keep track of. And even the International Maritime Organization is now taking things very seriously. So these countries have to keep pace with the global developments. Otherwise, we'll always be condemned for being away from what is happening. The second aspect is the water resource management. I mean, in India, we can say, I think there's almost 20% shortage of water. And with the growing urbanization and a whole lot of other issues, I think this is going to be a serious problem. And this is going to lead to conflict and confrontation among nations or even among states that is being seen. So I think governance has to look at this aspect also very seriously. Along with water resource management, I think water quality is another big issue. I mean, you can see there are, I mean, the pandemic also teaches us a lot of things, but even inadvertently also there is significant amount of biological and chemical contamination that is happening due to various aspects, agricultural practices and whole lot of other groundwater management, and we can just keep on discussing that. But there has to be a way to monitor what is happening and definitely bring it into. So this is all part of the underwater domain awareness that we talk about. I mean, it's not just, many people think it's only limited to the sea. Now, any governance mechanism has to first have a better domain awareness. But I mean, we are all aware of the maritime domain awareness that's being used so often. But the biggest confusion that I see is it remained event driven. I mean, globally, it is after the 9/11, and in our part of the world, it is after the 26/11 incident. And the bigger challenge is that it remained a security driven thing. So the participation by the other stakeholders was quite limited. And because of which, if you see that conventional maritime domain awareness formulation, it has largely remained limited to the surface. And the underwater part has not got and particularly in the developing world, the resources are always limited. The leadership or the establishment has to balance many aspects. So budget will have to compete with various factors. I mean, the security can never be given the kind of priority that they feel they deserve. So when we talk about the underwater domain awareness, these are the four stakeholders. I think this audience understands this very well. I would like to just kind of quickly go through to elaborate a little bit more. I mean, maritime security. Another thing is that if you look at the Indian Ocean region now, this particular South Asia and Southeast Asia, so many countries are going in for submarine deployment. One has to appreciate, I mean, one is the deployment itself requires a very different understanding of the underwater domain. But it is also can become, I mean, there are now nuclear submarines also. So from the regional safety perspective also, there is a lot more that we need to talk about and discuss. Then internal security is a very, very important issue. I mean, this region, political instability and whole lot of issues are there. So internal security is also a major issue. So we have to kind of be mindful. And today, the kind of disruptive technology that is available or disruptive means that are available with the non-state actors, I think there's a lot more focus that is required in terms of the underwater part. Now, in terms of blue economy, if oil, I mean, the energy security is definitely one of the prime kind of candidate for any strategic confrontation or interaction. But also the food security. Well, now we are increasingly looking at the sea for food security. But if you look at it, the Indian Ocean or even large parts of the world, I mean, fishing is in the unorganized sector. And on one end, there is the fish stock is on the decline. And on the other end, we know that the mechanized trawling or the heavy duty trawling, the bycatch is of the order of 80%. So how do we reconcile? I mean, how do we bring regulation? And more than the regulatory framework, the monitoring mechanism is more kind of complex when we talk about the underwater domain, and a lot more technology is required. Then we have these strategic assets. I mean, the oil and gas installations or the offshore assets that we have, their own dependence, their own requirement of technology, and also their impact on the environment. I mean, we have to be very, very mindful of all these things. And the accountability is more important. Then deep sea mining. I mean, the Indian Ocean has got vast resources, but these resources are only available to countries which have the means to reach there, which is not a very fair distribution of the resources that are there. So how can we have a regional framework, and that will bring far more peace and harmony rather than the present way of whosoever has the resources. Then obviously environment and disaster management. We are increasingly seeing a lot of disasters originating from the sea. Acoustic habitat degradation, I've already spoken enough on this, so that has to be given far more priority. I mean, on one end, if we want to drive development, we have to also keep the sustainability very, very clear. Then how do we use more and more science and technology? I mean, we are not even aware the kind of ecosystem that exists in our region. So how do we invest more and more on science and technology so that our awareness on the ecosystem is far better than what it is today? The area is very large. We can't put the conventional methods. How do we put smart sensors or smart systems which can give us far better domain awareness? And it has to be a collective effort. It cannot be bound by nations. It has to be a regional approach. And then how do we get, I mean, we can see there's a huge population. There is a demographic, I mean, we may say advantage, but if they are not channelized, so how do we build capacity becomes a very, very important. How can we deploy this energy for a collective good? This is the framework that we have proposed. If you look at the four sides of the cube, they represent the different stakeholders. All of them may have the unique requirement, but the core is the acoustic capacity and capability building. Typically, just to give you an example, a sonar that gives you 32 nautical miles in the Russian waters or the temperate or polar water, the same platform when it comes, or the same sonar when it comes to the Indian Ocean or the tropical waters, gives you only 6 to 7 nautical miles. There is a significant degradation of performance, almost say 70% degradation of performance. Now, with this kind of performance, whether it is a blue economic application or a security application, or you can, whatever you want to call it, we are not going to achieve much. So obviously there is a significant focus required on acoustic capacity and capability building. How can the West help us in this? There is a lot of effort required, and I think, and there is a lot of requirement of understanding the value of this data also. So this framework basically tries to propose pooling of resources and synergizing of effort. I mean, within nations also, different stakeholders need to come together, pool in their resources, spend more money and effort for local site-specific R&D and developing science and technology. But even among the nations in the region, if we can come together, there's a lot more that can happen. I mean, there has to be better policy intervention backed by technology intervention, and also good capacity and capability building, because more and more people have to have the skill and the knowledge to drive this. If you look at the vertical construct, a lot of sensing is required. We have very little information of what's happening there. Then once the data is there, we need to do the analysis, application specific analysis, and then the policy should come. We always try a top down approach. We try and import along with the technology, we also try to import the policy or the framework, which obviously doesn't work in our waters, and then we even forget the reference where we started from. And the smaller cubes within the larger cube that you see can be the smaller projects which our youngsters do, and their participation into the larger framework is extremely important. And there will be a seamless connect between all the players, and all of them can come together and contribute to the larger good, which is, I think, a very, very important area. And this can also, I mean, many times I see even organizations are duplicating efforts. So this can, even from a policy maker's perspective, he can actually color some part of this cube and say, oh, this is done, and the rest of it, the new people should work on the other side of the cube. Now, just to bring it to a smaller thing, like something like underwater radiated noise framework. I mean, the shipping noise is the biggest culprit in terms of big whale stranding, but the same thing is very important for the Navy also. So, and even the ship designers and ship builders also now need to come. I mean, I'm talking about the mercantile marine also. They need to come together on this. So, how all of them can pull in resources and work together and kind of bring policy and technology in, interventions, and also capacity building, and multiple such things can be taken forward. Something like sediment management. Sediment management is something very, very important, particularly in this tropical waters. I mean, in the temperate and the polar region, you won't see this. So it is very important that we understand what it is, and build up know-how and build up means which are suited to our conditions. Now, this is the framework. This has been done in the Indian context, but I think every country, the governance mechanisms have some very common framework. So one can see that different core areas are on one end, and we have the various schemes from the government on the other side, how they all can be put together to build this UDA framework. This is basically how the academia, industry, and the user can come together and kind of build a framework which is beneficial to all. Coastal communities is something very, very important, and this is where many times we do not give adequate attention to this. Their livelihood, their challenges, and many times we find that even because of the uncertainties in their practices, even the financial institutions are not coming forward to help them. So the UDA framework, and we have done many very specific projects to help the communities in how technology tool can bring far more certainty in their practices, is something we need to look at. Of course, the digital ocean will bring far more predictability in the underwater domain, various practices that are followed. And also we will be able to have better appreciation of the opportunity. I mean, many times the master plan itself is not done properly, and then we get stuck going forward. This causes a lot of heartburn for the communities and creates a lot of confusion. And even this regulatory framework, if they are data driven, it will be far better. And of course, governance has to be backed by very, very proper scientific tools. Even the fisheries sector, I think that's a very neglected area, and how to regulate, how to manage, it requires a lot of underwater domain awareness. the Honorable Prime Minister of India has given this Sagar vision. I think under that itself, India would be very keen to collaborate and make sure that there is a collective good in the entire region. I mean, these are some of the work we have done. I mean, you can see bringing more transparency. I mean, this is the whole digital ocean framework. You can see the spatio-temporal map, and we create these maps to get a much better understanding of this. These are all done application specific. You can see, and this area is varies a lot. You can see quarterly how much variation is there. Even a three-dimensional map has been built. So it's a complete three-dimensional digital ocean that we are working on. And it is not limited to the sea, it is also for the freshwater systems. This is one of the very unique projects we have done for which we have been recognized also. The entire AIS data has been converted into the underwater noise. And this is a real-time map which is updated every 5 minutes because that's the rate of the AIS data availability. And this actually takes care of the underwater conditions of our waters, of the tropical waters in the Indian Ocean. The complete digital algorithm has been designed and developed by us, and you get a complete sense of how it is behaving. So I think this is well understood. The transparency in the underwater domain will definitely bring far more governance. And there are so many applications one can think of. I mean, the entire sustainable blue economy can be supported. Of course, to make it happen, skilling and knowledge is something very important. That's the whole capacity building initiative. And according to us, acoustic survey, which is basically deployment of sonar, is very important. So we have designed various skilling programs and various academic programs, research programs. Underwater biotechnology and even biosciences, I would like to add. That is again another very important pillar. And the third is AI and robotics. Because again, underwater data or underwater signals behave very differently. So a lot of domain understanding is very, very important here. We've been doing a lot of programs. UDA Summer School, we've been doing it for the last 5 years. Last 2 years, pandemic, we had to shift to the online mode. But we've had students from all kinds of institutions, even the top IITs students also come to us. We have started getting students from abroad also now. And we are happy to work with our partners in the region. And we can, this is a 6 weeks program where students come, and it's a residential program in the offline mode, but we can have a hybrid mode as required. And they are given exposure, they do projects, and they do a whole lot of things. And the resource persons are definitely the top of the line. I mean, anybody who comes, and they spend a lot of time. I mean, that's been the beauty of this. Senior people, like even a former naval chief, has come and spent 5 hours with our participants. And we have done it at the national level, and it's a different format. We've had a Coast Guard officer also who have joined us, DRDO scientists, shipyard officer, and of course, young students and faculty, PhD aspirants. You can see the Honorable Chief Minister of Goa, Director of National Institute of Oceanography, the former director, a whole lot of people. You can see Admiral Arun Prakash sir, former naval chief, Captain Dilip Donde, the first Indian to circumnavigate. And our training modules also have a lot of field work. I mean, this is the field work we have done in the Khadakwasta Lake in Pune. We deploy sensors, do data collection, do analysis, and whole lot of things. My last slide, I mean, we propose an outreach, engage, and sustain model. Outreach is these kind of webinars and seminars where we sensitize everybody, right from policymaker to the young students. Then we engage with them. On one end, we engage with the senior policymakers, but also with the young students. And we also give out fellowships so that they can kind of get associated and try and build a career. And then in terms of sustain, we start working on specific projects, get support, whether it is funding support or any other support, policy support from the government or any agency, and work on. We have done a lot of work on all the 3 aspects, whether it is policy, technology, and also capacity building. And I propose setting up a center of excellence, which will have these 5 sub-centers, a research center, which will be a multidisciplinary research center, an incubation center where all the innovative ideas and startup ideas are taken to the next level, skilling and leadership center, academic center, and a policy center, all working together under one umbrella. Thank you very much. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you for your patience. I would now request Ambassador Bernard Gunateleke, sir, is the chairman of Pathfinder Foundation Sri Lanka. He began his career as a Foreign Service officer in 1970 and after that held several positions in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, including as Director General of Multilateral Affairs and Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He holds a degree in History and Diploma in International Relations, and during his career, he served as Permanent Representative of Sri Lanka to the United Nations in Geneva, during which period he was concurrently accredited to the Holy See and as a Permanent Representative of Sri Lanka to the UN in Vienna. Later, he served as Sri Lanka's ambassador to the People's Republic of China and then appointed as the Director General of the Secretary of Coordinating the Peace Process and functioned as a member of the government negotiating team. He also served as acting permanent representative of Sri Lanka to the UN and later appointed as the chairman of the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority and Sri Lanka Tourism Promotion Bureau, and has since served as the director of several companies associated with Maritime Merchant Bank Limited and also the chairperson of the Pathfinder Foundation. Ambassador, sir, the floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, Dr. Harnabda, Mr. Pratap Heblika, distinguished participants. To begin with, I must say that we have given fairly wide publicity to this event in Sri Lankan print media, and I hope that would generate some interest on the part of the Sri Lankan audience with regard to the subject matter. Looking at the topic of today's webinar, Indo-Sri Lanka Relations and BIMSTEC, a new perspective based on underwater domain awareness framework, I note three features. One relates to Indo-Lanka relations, the second to the BIMSTEC, and the third to our principal subject, underwater domain awareness. First, looking at the Indo-Sri Lanka relations, one has to look at the past, present, and future relations between asymmetrical countries in size, population, and economic endowments to understand the status of our bilateral relations. I need not go into the details of our bilateral relations or the shared civilizational relationship with India, which is well known to us all. Since independence, both countries have enjoyed a robust relationship, as demonstrated by the amicable settlement relating to the persons of Indian origin in Ceylon, that was in 1964, and the International Maritime Border Settlement between the two countries in 1974 and 1976. In retrospect, we have to acknowledge that the relationship had experienced ups and downs from time to time. However, what is essential at this stage is to focus clearly on future relations that would cover a broad spectrum of political, economic, security, and people-to-people relations. Considering the difficult financial situation faced by Sri Lanka currently, and the positive and supportive role played by India to lessen that burden, we need to examine how best Sri Lanka could link up with rising India economically. Second, looking at the prevailing situation in the Indian Ocean region and Southeast Asia, it is clear that SAARC, the regional organization we belong to, has bogged down when compared with the resilient ASEAN. We need not dwell on the reasons for this situation, as we are all well aware where the fault lines are. BIMSTEC, the regional organization benefiting from the Bay of Bengal, has become the viable alternative for the region's economic advancement. We have to admit that during the lifespan of 25 years, the progress of BIMSTEC has been somewhat slow. However, the grouping has succeeded in establishing its secretariat in 2014, and now we are ready with the institution's charter, which will be adopted at the fifth summit to be held in Colombo later this month. The free trade zone agreement lags with no impetus for its completion and adoption. Against this backdrop, what is needed are directives at the high political level to respective negotiators of each country to address the outstanding issues as a matter of priority, so that the free trade agreement would eventually be a reality. Until that happens, BIMSTEC should identify low-hanging fruit to ensure the organization's momentum. While economic issues take forefront in BIMSTEC-related matters, the institution also focuses on security-related issues. This is another area on which the member countries should focus, as security is an essential ingredient for uninterrupted economic development. Having touched on the Bay of Bengal and security issues briefly, I would now like to focus on the central theme of our webinar today, which is maritime domain awareness, emphasizing on underwater domain awareness, as both areas form integral components of maritime security and economic development. Maritime security is an essential component of global economic well-being, including to the littoral and hinterland states of the Bay of Bengal. Speaking on the Indian Ocean in general and the Bay in particular, there are maritime concerns ranging from piracy at sea to illegal migration, narcotic drugs and weapon smuggling, etc. Threats of terrorist attacks and environmental catastrophes, as Sri Lanka had to face in the past, also come under the broad umbrella of maritime security. This highlights the need for enhanced maritime domain awareness, defined by the International Maritime Organization as the practical understanding of anything associated with the maritime domain that could impact the security, safety, economy, or environment. While MDA had been a critical component relating to maritime security, its importance received a fillip following incidents such as 9/11 and 26/11, where threats emanated from air and sea. For Sri Lanka, the utility of MDA was a constant factor during the separatist war that ended in 2009, where military hardware and other supplies were smuggled into the country by sea from motherships. The back of the separatist movement was broken with the detection and destruction of a multitude of such vessels, some located thousands of nautical miles away from the Sri Lankan shores. Such a feat was possible thanks to the intelligence provided by friendly countries. I don't want to name them, but some of us know, which were better equipped to monitor movement of suspicious vessels. MDA plays a significant role in safeguarding security of India and Sri Lanka, which have a coastline of 7,000 kilometers and 1,000 kilometers respectively. The maritime domain has no defined borders, with ships flying foreign flags. They are permitted even within the territorial waters of coastal states. It is necessary to be aware of what is going on even beyond the EEZ of coastal country, as Sri Lanka had realized during the separatist war. Underwater domain awareness is associated with MDA, but not necessarily subordinate to it. In fact, UDA had not received the recognition it deserves until lately. It has been observed that UDA, and I quote, transcends the security discourse and integrates all key stakeholders, including the security apparatus, blue economic entities, environmental regulators, as stated by Dr. Das some time ago, and those who are involved with disaster management responsibilities. Sri Lanka had experience with security threats that originated from underwater or submersible attacks during the separatist war. And Sri Lanka Navy had to adapt itself to safeguard the major ports from such underwater attacks. Leaving security aspect aside, there are other areas such as blue economy, environmental disasters resulting from oil spills, etc., that require adequate awareness of what is going on under the waters. There are several other areas of concern. One such area is consequences of deep sea mining for minerals, activities of submarines which are engaged in mapping the ocean floor during peace times in preparation for wartime activities, and safety of underwater communication cables, integrity of which should be ensured at all times. In this regard, we should be thankful to the Maritime Research Center and its founder and director, Dr. Arnab Das, for moving into hitherto overlooked area or a terrain by taking the initiatives to highlight the importance of UDA. Already, there is collaboration between involving India, Maldives, and Sri Lanka in relation to MDA. Considering the current realities, such cooperation would also accommodate interested BIMSTEC countries and broaden the area of interest to cover underwater domain awareness. On behalf of the Pathfinder Foundation, which plans to work closely with MRC on the subject, I wish to express our appreciation to Dr. Das and hope today's webinar would open new vistas for those who are associated with security, blue economy, disaster management, and related areas. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I definitely take note of what you said, and the people-to-people contact, as you mentioned, is definitely very, very important. At the government-to-government level, of course, there's a lot happening. But I think together, if we can give more importance to this people-to-people contact also, I think we as people will also benefit, and the entire region will benefit going forward. Thank you very much for your very, very insightful remarks. I'll take a small departure from the schedule, and I'll request Captain Vijay Sakhuja, sir, to come in. Dr. Vijay Sakhuja is a former naval officer and served in the Indian Navy for more than 2.5 decades. He was Director of Research at the Indian Council for World Affairs, ICWA, New Delhi, from 2009 to 2014. He has also been the research faculty of a number of think tanks like Institute of South Asian Studies, the Center for Air Power Studies, Observer Research Foundation, IDSA, and United Services Institute of India. Dr. Sakhuja received the PhD and MPhil degree from Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi and has published a number of books, edited volumes, monographs, policy briefs, and maritime security on maritime security, international relations, geopolitics, and Arctic affairs. He is also on the international editorial board of Journal of Indian Ocean Region and the member of the Executive Council of the Center for Ocean and Environmental Studies. I met Sir when he was the director at the National Maritime Foundation. Vijay sir, your turn, sir.
Thank you, Arnab, for this very generous introduction. I must apologize for having pushed my way through because I have to take a class, and the young students, I have a course to teach. I teach emerging technologies at the Sastra in Tanjore. So, I'm sorry about it, having pushed you hard, but then I realized that I haven't had the opportunity to share with you all the members of this particular panel, my latest book. Rather, I call it latest because the first time I'm sharing it in the public domain. The book was initially titled Bay of Bengal and BIMSTEC. I published it about 2 years ago, 2020. but then the corona hit us, and that's the end of it. It has been lying in the shelf, gathering dust, and I think I dusted it this morning and pulled it out, and I say, let me begin. But then when I was writing this, it is not single author. It's a two-author volume by another gentleman, Somen Banerjee. And when we finished this book, we found that our deductions were very interesting, that we don't see a war over there. We see Bay of Bengal being more placid and calm, and we wanted to bring that up front and say, so we called it Sea of Collective Destiny. So we prefixed it to read as, the title now reads as Sea of Collective Destiny, Bay of Bengal and BIMSTEC, and there is a generous mention of Sri Lanka and India in it. Suffice to say, I'm not going to go into the details of the book, but I thought it'll be a good idea. We have about literally about three dozen or 4 dozen policy recommendations, and I thought I'll just mention some of those. And what particularly struck me was that we are in a particular position now where we are talking about blue economy. Everybody's talking about blue economy. It resonates, and sometimes it is fashionable to talk, but I think it is very useful to talk about blue economy. And it is desirable. It's a subject that must really get across domains, and then at the same time, it should be something that we pitch it much higher. But unfortunately, we all talk about blue economy, but we don't figure out how much is the component of blue economy as far as Bay of Bengal is concerned, as for the national GDP. Where does it pitch in? How do we bring this awareness? And closely related to this issue, we argue in our book that we need to think about in terms of blue bonds. Where do we generate this revenue? Where will it all come from? That is what struck us the most. We talk about blue economy. Where is the money? Where would the investments come? Where would technology come? They were all going to cost us. And here the whole issue about in our findings of this. We also were very, very fortunate. We wanted to look at something very, very interesting areas. Heritage tourism. That was something absent. And this could be one of the agendas, and closely related to that issue that could be talked in terms of something called as establishing port city cooperation networks. We've not done, we talk about short sea shipping in the Bay of Bengal, we argue that particular case, but we don't have any network. We would like to see that kind of a network emerge. Maybe we have, Sri Lanka could take the lead. They're the leaders, the top container port for us, as far as the region is concerned. I think they have an opportunity here. Tribal cooperation resonates. I'm not going to talk about it. Also, low-hanging fruits that was referred to, cabotage law, harmonization. All these issues are small little things, but they will bring about a revolution in the way we bring about connectivity, particularly maritime connectivity, whether we become trade, whether it be port development. All these issues are going to be extremely important. Well, having said that, I also realize that this is again beyond what is happening, beyond the book I'm going to talk about. Just take about 3-4 minutes. What struck me was that today is an age of digital world. From digital, we have gone to digitalized. We are now being disrupted with artificial intelligence, big data, machine learning. A host of things have come. The whole notion of smart ports is there. If you look at the market, it is 5 years from now, we're going to see autonomous ships operating, not in this part of the world, but elsewhere. And that is where we'll need smart ports to be handling them. Now, I'm not suggesting we start getting into autonomous port, because we still need to we have to bring digital connectivity across the heartland, particularly in a country like India. 5G we are talking about. As a matter of fact, we find that there's already a discussion about 6G going on, right? I'm not talking about that, but we need to bring about a bit of digitalization if this region, BIMSTEC region, or for that matter, Bay of Bengal, is going to be part of the larger ecosystem that we are talking about. And closely, we have a very probably a narrower definition of smart ports. To my mind, smart would also mean green. And if you were to look at COP26, we just gone by a few months ago, and if we were to look at the Clydebank Declaration, we are going to see hydrogen is going to be another fuel. Can this region take the lead? And that is where we're going to talk about blue-green of sort. We're talking about gray hydrogen, we're talking about blue hydrogen, we're talking about green hydrogen, variety of hydrogen. And I find that one individual private company, at least in India, Reliance, is going to be spending about and investing about $60 billion. So there's a huge market. And we're going to see ships moving, and we'll have ports fed with hydrogen as an alternate, because we're going to reach up. We have to reach up net zero. States have committed themselves to 2030, 2050. For us in India, 2070. But then this is the shape of things which is going to be coming in. Also, there was a reference also, His Excellency made a reference to seabed mining. BIMSTEC in the summit document also make a reference, 2017 document, they talk about seabed mining. What struck me was that just earlier this month, the International Seabed Authority and the IORA signed a memorandum of understanding on seabed exploration, capacity building, skill development, training, legislations, all that, legislative frameworks, etc. I think it's not a bad idea. At least 3 of us are members of the IORA. We could take 3 or 4 of us, then we could be part and parcel of that, or we could set up for ourselves a regional approach to seabed mining. That is where, but then we'll also have to be conscious and careful about the sustainability factor. Right. Finally, there is also a reference to maritime security. Well, it is something which is going to be there with us, but I'm going to move away from classic definition of maritime security. Ladies and gentlemen, for me, the concern is maritime security we've done. Maritime domain awareness we have done extensively. I think we are rich in those many terms. Our security forces have done a great job. What about coastal security? That is where the coastal police comes in. And related to that will be maritime law capacity building. That is where we could take the lead. In terms of how do you manage coastal zones, this is all part of parcel of the blue economy. In terms of wildlife acts, what are the laws that are connected with it? Because blue economy, we are talking about blue economy. Day in, day out, we talk about economy. The leaders talk about it. It is now time that we got to put action. We got to put meat on the bone as such, if I may use a very cliched way of suggesting. But we need to put a lot of skill developments into this. What would be needed? Capacity building, indigenous, I mean, within the region, or we need to go across. And if need be, go across. Also, we find, this is again my observation, and when I look at what is the investments coming in blue economy, we find a large number of investments coming from the European world. But then we probably ourselves within the taking note of all this. Can we build up ourselves kind of a capacity development, technology development for the development of any nation can take this. I'm not suggesting India should take the lead. Bangladesh could take the lead. Sri Lanka could take the lead. Anyone can take the lead. But then somebody else has to take the lead and say, okay, here we work it. Can we create a platform or a forum beyond the BIMSTEC? BIMSTEC, everybody talks. There are statements made. They are very, very important statements expressing the intention, the intent behind, the commitment behind. But then we have to formulate working groups. Fine, they did a good job. But at the end of the day, what products? The product of BIMSTECs will be what we put out in operations and share it with everybody. I'll stop here. And if there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer very quickly. I still have about 2-3 minutes. Thank you very much. And my apologies for pushing very hard on this. Thank you.
So much, sir. Definitely, sir. Digitization or digital ocean, it sounds very good, and there are definitely going to be a lot of benefits. But once you get into it, you understand the complexities of that, and we have to definitely move towards digital ocean. It has several advantages, and whatever challenges come, we'll have to try and overcome them as they come. Thank you so much for your comments, sir.
Thank you very much.
I'll request Vice Admiral MP Muralidharan, sir, AVSM and BAR NM, former DG Indian Coast Guard. He is an alumnus of the National Defence Academy, Khadakwasla, and was commissioned into the Indian Navy in 1st January 1975. He is a specialist in navigation and direction and also holds a postgraduate degree in defence studies. In a career of almost 4 decades, he has held several key operational and staff appointments. As a Director General Indian Coast Guard, he was a member of various institutional and government committees. Post-retirement, the Admiral was appointed by the President of India as a member of the Armed Forces Tribunal, and during his tenure of 4 years, the Admiral authored only nearly 500 judgments, which included some landmark decisions. He is also a member of various strategic studies societies and institutions such as the National Maritime Foundation Institute of Defence Studies and Analysis and United Services Institute of India, and was awarded the Ati Vashisht Seva Medal twice by the President of India, and is also a recipient of the Nausena Medal. Admiral sir, your turn, sir.
Thank you, Arnab, for your very kind words. I will share my screen first and then I will start my presentation. Thank you, Arnab, Mr. Hebleka, other distinguished panelists. At the outset, let me thank Arnab and the MRC for giving me this opportunity to be here with you all. Now, for a mariner, nothing has been more exhilarating than to see the world shifting focus towards the maritime arena, which happened more towards the end of the last century. I will therefore, over the next 15 minutes or so, look at the maritime strategic perspectives. I will look at it in a more broader sense because we'll be having further discussions on the minor issues. Situated as we are on the Indian Ocean region, the words of Admiral Alfred Thayer Mahan, the US naval officer, thinker, and historian of the 19th century, actually comes flashing by when he had prophetically said that whoever controls Indian Ocean controls Asia. This ocean is the key to the seven seas. In the 21st century, the destiny of the world will be decided on its waters. Of course, a slight change in that is that today the concept has been expanded to that of Indo-Pacific and not merely the Indian Ocean region. Now, this issue was very succinctly put across by the Indian Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi at the Shangri-La Dialogue in 2018, when he said that in the 21st century, destiny of the world will be deeply influenced by the course of developments in the Indo-Pacific region. He further brought out that India's strategic outlook towards the region would be that their own engagement in the Indo-Pacific region from the shores of Africa to that of the Americas will be inclusive, promote a democratic and rule-based international order. He went on to say that we'll work with others to keep our seas, space, and airways free and open, our nations secure from terrorism, and our cyberspace free from disruption and conflict. Now, to the geostrategic significance of the seas or the maritime arena would be evident in the fact that about 70% of the earth is covered by sea. Nearly 2/3 of the population lives within 100 nautical miles, 100 miles of the coast, and 150 of the 192 member states of the UN are coastal states. 80% of our cities of the world and nearly all major trade and financial centers are located on the coast. Now, the past few decades have seen liberalization across the world, leading to closer cooperation between nations in manufacturing, trade, and capital flows, resulting in enhanced economic interdependence. Now, development of newer technologies in communication and transportation, some of which the previous speaker spoke about, has also enhanced trade and would only increase further as more developed nations try to leverage globalization. Shipping still remains the cheapest form of transportation of cargo, and therefore the global maritime trade accounts for about 80% of the world trade by volume and 70% by value. We have about 54,000 ships, estimated about $450 billion, which plies the ocean routes, generating nearly 14 million jobs. And total trade across the ocean, when you consider the imports and exports, is almost $35,000 billion. Now, apart from transportation, oceans are also a major source of food, which Arnab mentioned, of metals, minerals, and energy resources. As natural resources on the land deplete, and with cheaper technologies emerging for extraction of resources from deep sea, the importance of the maritime arena would only grow further. Now, if you look at the Indian Ocean region where we are situated, it will be observed that it has got nearly 33% of the world's population, accounts for 50% of maritime trade, and 50% of container traffic, and 70% of the global trade in oil and gas fly through this region. Now, as the Persian Gulf is the repository of 60% of oil reserves and about 26% of natural gas reserves, which are located in the region, no wonder that the major oil arteries of the world actually flow through this region. Now, trade through Indian Ocean region, you can see the sea lanes which are depicted, impacts all major nations and economies in the world, thus encouraging most world powers to have a foothold or at least a regular presence in the region. Needless to say, as you can see, the natural geographical location of India and Sri Lanka places both our countries in a strategically strong position to safeguard and enable free flow of trade through the Indian Ocean region. Now, if you go further and look at the Indo-Pacific as one region, it's again a multicultural, multipolar region with nearly 60% of the world's GDP and 65% of the population and 60% of the global maritime trade. Now, after viewing Indo-Pacific, you come to the Bay of Bengal region, you can virtually see that it lies in the heart of the Indo-Pacific, or actually in the middle of it. The waters of Bay of Bengal connect the Indian and Pacific Oceans. It also links regional initiatives such as ASEAN, SAARC, and of course the Bay of Bengal Initiative for Multi-Sectoral Technical Economic Cooperation, or that's the BIMSTEC. The strategic location of the region gives it an impact on security and economy of Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Thailand, and India, along with landlocked nations such as Nepal and Bhutan. Now, if you go back in history, you will find that the Bay of Bengal region was strategically important even in those era. This the map depicts that what happened around 250 years before the Christian era. And later, during the colonial era, Great Britain and Holland held sway in this area, and it became a virtually British lake by about the 19th century. Subsequent naval battles that took place in the Bay of Bengal during World Wars I and II highlighted the strategic significance of the area. While post-World War II, it remained a link between South Asia and Southeast Asia. The region emerged as a strategic entity only quite recently, over the last 2 decades, when the littoral nations began to look upon the region collectively, realizing its criticality in their own growth and security. Now, the geostrategic value of the area is evident from the number of extra-regional powers who are looking for bases or have forward deployed their forces, including nuclear-capable ones in the region, in support of their respective interests. Now, you find naval forces from the United States, United Kingdom, France, China, and many others which are operating in this area. Now, from China's point of view, it's the western adjunct of the South China Sea and an outlet for a southern landlocked region. China, therefore, has emerged, increased its presence and engagements in the region, and has emerged and is looking as an alternative to her Malacca dilemma. That's the possibility of connecting to the Indian Ocean through Myanmar and the Bay of Bengal. So the area is a complex and geopolitical geostrategic environment which enhances chance of development of traditional and non-traditional security threats with transnational linkages. The role of non-state actors instigating proxy war situation also needs to be kept in view. Now, having taken an overview of the strategic security perspective of the area, it would be evident to all that maritime security has a predominant role. Now, challenges to maritime security would happen to the economic well-being, which is energy, trade and commerce, living and non-living resources, or to social stability, which are crimes in the maritime arena, or to political peace, that's a maritime sovereignty, or even to the health for the people, which is basically the environment. Now, towards the second half of the 20th century, it became evident that there was the shift from the traditional naval confrontation that occurred in the high seas to challenges in the littoral region, something which the previous speaker again mentioned, and more so towards the non-conventional maritime security challenges, which are also called as low-intensity maritime operations, or LIMO. Now, this would include aspects like maritime terrorism, piracy, drug trafficking, arms trafficking, gun running, poaching, human trafficking, and of course, IUU, or illegal, unregulated and unreported fishing, which is very prominent in our waters, and illegal gathering of sensitive seismic and economic data. Now, many of these threats could emerge from non-state entities who could well be funded by states which choose to remain in the background. It would be apparent that challenges to maritime security are varied and complex and often cut across political boundaries, which in turn calls for cooperation between nations to safeguard common maritime interests. Now, examination of security issues often leads to the question of how do we achieve maritime security? Now, it would be obvious that the first step would be enhancing knowledge or awareness of the maritime domain. While the term maritime domain awareness, as we now call it, is comparatively new terminology, let me say that nations and maritime forces from ancient times have always been attempting to enhance their maritime situational awareness in order to check enemy attacks and also to retain advantage over competitors in maritime trade. Now, maritime domain awareness has been broadly depicted on this slide, has been defined by the IMO as an effective understanding of anything associated with maritime domain that could impact security, safety, economy, or the environment. In simpler terms, it actually comes to improving situational awareness in order to better respond to any kind of scenario or situation developing in the maritime domain. Now you can see the kind of forces that are required, from satellites to aircraft to ships to underwater sensors. It would be evident that it is something needed on a continuous basis to enable timely identification of developing threats and to overcome them at both strategic and operational levels. And today's scenario calls for monitoring of activities along the sea and the adjoining coast, under the sea, in the air and the space based, as well as, that means, cyber surveillance. Now, in this context, I would like to highlight that littoral nations of the region have a significance in the Bay of Bengal region, exclusive economic zones, but individually have limited surveillance capacity to monitor such large areas. Now, closer cooperation in MDA would allow continuous surveillance and identification of hostile threats approaching coastal waters. This would be more so in curbing transnational and non-conventional security challenges. Now, underwater domain awareness, about which Arnab spoke a little more in detail, is actually focused on the underwater sector, and it's a very key element of MDA. From security's perspective, it is vital to safeguard our sea lanes of communication, passage through coastal waters, and to safeguard other maritime assets against underwater threats from submarines, mines, or even divers. It is not only a military requirement, but also a scientific one to monitor undersea geophysical activities, which can provide vital clues to detect natural disasters and also gather data on living and non-living resources in the sea, including to safeguard degradation of ecosystems. Now, you'll agree with me that MDA or UDA is not something that is easily achieved, as the seamless nature of maritime domain enables a steady flow of threats and challenges from one area to another. Now, key ingredients are intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, which calls for combined efforts of multiple agencies to continuously monitor the areas of interest, to gather, correlate, analyze, and fuse inputs so that we get a coherent tactical picture for timely dissemination to decision makers and to initiate actions where necessary. Now, patrolling by ships, aircraft, UAV, space-based surveillance, and underwater-based sensors are all used for maritime domain data gathering. Now, surveillance of choke points and vital areas would need to be on a near continuous basis. Now, anti-submarine operations too would call for sea-based monitoring of system. Now, it would be evident that no single nation of a region can do it all alone. The Information Fusion Center, set up at Gurugram in 2018 by India, was a major step in collaborating with countries in the region and multinational agencies to enhance maritime awareness, and share information. Now, the center currently has linkages with 21 partner countries, with many of them having liaison officers at the center and about 22 multinational agencies across the world to enhance the surveillance of maritime spaces and sea lanes of communication virtually across Indo-Pacific. Now, those of you who had gone through their annual report would see the kind of information that is generated and available. Now, coming back to the strategic outlook in the region, challenges continue to emerge to the security architecture in the region due to ever-changing geopolitical environment, which in turn calls for opportunities to strengthen existing platforms and to look at newer areas of cooperation among littoral regions. Now, India, with her Eastern Naval Command and the Tri-Service Andaman Nicobar Command located on the Bay of Bengal, with their headquarters at Visakhapatnam and Port Blair, is actually a key security provider, or I would say key security coordinator for the area, and port visits by the Indian Navy and Coast Guard have always played a significant role in enhancing India's connect with maritime nations of the region. A port visit by ships at regular intervals, bilateral exercises both by the Navy as well as the Coast Guard, and coordinated patrols along the maritime boundaries, anti-piracy operations, assistance in search and rescue, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief post major calamities like the tsunami which took place, staff talks, training, and other interaction have all helped increase cooperation and information sharing. Now, white shipping agreements and coordinated patrols will also help boost the MDA abilities. Now, coordinated patrol is one way to keep the exclusive economic zone safe, and the Coast Guard forces, which are mandated to do this. This will also ensure implementation of the UN UNCLOS. Now, I have had the opportunity to interact extensively with the Sri Lankan Coast Guard when you had very close interaction and exercises, and how we used to closely link and share information apart from search and rescue and many other issues that develop. Now, this is the kind of thing that we need to develop further so that we can have better understanding of this maritime scenario. Now, this is where platforms and initiatives such as like the Sagar and the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative and the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium and exercises like Milan, which actively engages the Bay of Bengal littorals, can play a major role. Now, EONS, as you know, is an initiative led by the Indian Navy to provide a platform for military leaders of the region to discuss regional challenges. India also regularly hosts the Milan. The recently hosted Milan biennial event had participation of the littoral navies of Bay of Bengal as well as the larger Indo-Pacific community. As many as 40 nations took place, and the sea part of the exercise had more than 26 ships, an equal number of aircraft, and even a submarine taking part in the joint exercises. Now, regional security is best addressed through consultative collaborative approach and overview of regional challenges and in areas of mutual interest. Now, BIMSTEC, which has 14 sectors of cooperation, have all of them are directly or indirectly linked to the maritime domain and provide an excellent platform to enhance maritime security cooperation in the area. Similarly, the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative, which India proposed at the East Asia Summit in Bangkok in November 2019, also seeks to create partnerships to ensure security and stability in the maritime domain through a non-treaty based cooperative collaborative approach. Now, it covers a wide spectrum of maritime issues, as can be seen through its 7 pillars, which includes the vital aspects of maritime security, ecology, resources, and disaster risk management. Let me sum up by saying that the strategic importance of the Bay of Bengal region will continue to grow in the years ahead as littoral nations, as well as the extra-regional ones, seek to compete over strategic and commercial interests. The littoral nations must continue to explore new areas of cooperation to ensure safeguarding of national as well as common strategic interests. This is where India and Sri Lanka can take the initiative in BIMSTEC, and maritime security challenges, as has been observed, are varied and often transcend political boundaries. Cooperation to enhance maritime domain awareness and the underwater domain awareness, backed by a robust and possibly coordinated patrolling, would allow all our nations and maritime agencies to monitor oceans more effectively. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you so much, sir. Indeed, a very. Now, I'll request Sri Sanjay Vishwanathan, sir, Chairman Adi Group. He is the founder and chairman of Adi Group, the parent company of Adi Pro Aviation. He is a graduate of Harvard Business School and Stasha University. He has over 30 years of experience in operating expertise in delivering growth and value creation. Sanjay has served and led many organizations under his name. He served as the CEO of Sonata Limited Group and executive officer at RELX. He was also the vice president of GE Genpact, business leader at Infosys and 3M. Based in London with his roots in India, he now leads Adi Partners globally, the firm he founded in fall 2010. Sanjay sir, the floor is yours, sir.
Right. So essentially, I mean, listening to the esteemed panel here of Mr. Heblica, yourself, Arnab, Admiral Muralidharan, Ambassador Gunathilake, and Dr. Sukuja. So I think clearly there seems to be a very clear dots to connect, I would say, between all of us here in terms of the importance of the region. And I think one of the things that I wanted to stress on is, as Mr. Heblica said right at the outset, I want to talk about what is it that industry can do to enable this region to become a significant economic corridor, similar to what, say, the US-Mexico corridor is, or the US-Canada corridor is. I mean, I think the way India needs to see this is, given the scale of growth India is going to see economically, I think we're going to see a tremendous opportunity for India to play the same role in the region, like, say, America is playing with Canada or Mexico, right? So firstly, let's look at the economic parameters, if you will, starting with, say, the demographics of the region. I mean, Sri Lanka, interestingly, in terms of size for us, is roughly slightly smaller than Kerala, the state of Kerala, right? If you think about it, it's about slightly smaller than Nepal. So it's certainly the size of a state that India can handle quite easily, right? Number one. Secondly, if you think about the purchasing power and the economic parity or the currency parity, India is about 1:4 to the currency with Sri Lanka, versus, let's say, if you took Nepal and Bangladesh, it's only about 1:1.5. So in other words, the dots I'm connecting here are demographically, Sri Lanka is in the sweet spot for India in terms of size of market, as well, not just in terms of a market to serve, but also a market that can serve India. Secondly, because of the currency exchange rates, etc., I think it gives India an extremely important low-cost destination for us to be able to source products and services from the country. Now, having said that, there's also the Indian Ocean region, and many of you have spoken about the importance of the region from a security perspective, and that's also, I think, an economic imperative for us to talk about. So I think if you look at these three broad areas, the first thing I want to say is there's an opportunity for Sri Lanka to move up the tech continuum from being just a supplier of low-tech products and services to India to actually becoming high-tech. And let me give you an example of what I mean by that. If you think about energy, I think there's a great opportunity for Sri Lanka to become a manufacturing hub for hydrogen fuel cells. and electric vehicles for India going forward, because India is going to be one of the world's largest open markets for energy fuel, whether it's fuel cells or battery-powered vehicles. So from an RD Group perspective, we have been looking at the country very closely, and I think sometime in 23, we'll make a commitment to invest and create a hub for hydrogen fuel cells and lithium batteries out of Sri Lanka, especially to serve the three-wheeler and the LCV marketplace in India, which is going to explode over the next decade or so. So we think that Sri Lanka can move up the value chain because of its, the sort of demographics and the economics it provides to provide India a base in energy. The second area, I think, again, if I was to connect the dots with the defense aspect of the Indian Ocean region, I think Sri Lanka can become an extremely important center of excellence in the area of cyber security. Because I think across the Indian Ocean region, cyber security is going to become the theater where the wars of the future are going to be fought. So within RD Defense, we're making a big bet on cyber, and we want to see what platform Sri Lanka can provide us, right? And therefore, I think there is an opportunity for us here to see where Sri Lanka's workforce, Sri Lanka's infrastructure, especially the technology infrastructure, I think can become a really important platform for us in terms of positioning cybersecurity for the region. Now, to make the above happen, energy and cybersecurity, you're going to need a skilled workforce. And I think this is where education comes into play. And that's going to be the third pillar for our strategy for Sri Lanka industry-wise. We already have a business called Ed for All. We're already in conversations with a very large provider in Sri Lanka, a telecom provider. And our objective is to see how we can bring skills and knowledge to the Sri Lankan workforce, because there's a 300,000 job gap, between the demand and supply, right? And we think we can fill that gap through better quality skills. Now, obviously, if we can do that in the next 12 to 18 months, then this platform of education can also start to create a workforce for energy and cybersecurity. So, in a nutshell, I think India has a tremendous opportunity under BIMSTEC to leverage the India-Sri Lanka corridor, make this as strategically important as the the US-Canada and the US-Mexico corridor is economically, firstly. Secondly, I think for us to be able to leverage the workforce and the economic parity between the two countries, currency-wise, to be able to invest strategically in these high-tech areas. And if that happens, we think the impact over the next decade will be such that Sri Lanka's exports to India would go up from less than $1 billion to at least about $8 billion. So that's a good 10x growth. And the impact on the Indian GDP would be about $80 billion, which is roughly about 2.5% to 3% increase in her own GDP. So it's a win-win for both countries. And we think that BIMSTEC has a tremendous platform to endeavor that. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It definitely brings a very different perspective, and that's what we look for. I mean, we want to discuss as many different aspects. I would now request Professor H.P. Rajan, sir. He was the Deputy Director, Division for Ocean Affairs and Law of the Seas in the United Nations, and Secretary for the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf and Secretary of the Meetings of the States Parties to the UN Convention on the Laws of the Sea. He has also served in the Government of India as Director, Antarctica, and later as advisor in the then Department of Ocean Development. Later on, he served as the Assistant Professor of International Law at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Legal Advisor to the Republic of Maldives, Special Assistant to the Secretary General and Chief Office of Administration and Management, International Seabird Authority. He was also one of the first elected members of the Legal and Technical Commission. Post-retirement from the United Nations, he also served as a legal advisor for Law of the Sea at the Asian African Legal Consultative Organization. Rajan sir, the floor is yours, sir.
First of all, Let me thank you, Dr. Navdas, for inviting me to this webinar. And I'm really privileged to be here and hear the distinguished speakers before me. They have covered a vast spectrum of areas and subjects involved. They have covered a lot of practical aspects also involved in various subjects. And it is really very interesting to note that so many issues have been gathered together. And in the context of what we are going to try to focus, that is the maritime domain awareness and its offspring, I should say, the underwater domain awareness and its contemporary relevance to the BIMSTEC, which needs to be focused. Now, my own area being law, and my own area of work has been the law of the sea. Therefore, my perspective is going to be from the legal point of view, because when I'm asked to speak about the blue economy and the relevance to this region, so my focus therefore is mainly on the legal part of it, and I can give some observations on the legal side. First of all, what I understand is the maritime domain awareness and the underwater domain awareness is the focus is mainly on matters of security and strategic importance. Whereas blue economy, on the other hand, is essentially resource oriented. A blue economy refers to harnessing of ocean resources for economic benefits. Now, inherently, of course, while harnessing resources of the oceans, there is an element of security involved, but that kind of security that is involved is slightly different from the security and strategic perspectives that I heard about the NDA and the UDA part. The Bay of Bengal initiative, on the other hand, has included blue economy in its agenda since 2016. And the BIMSTEC emphasizes the importance of cooperation in the region and includes maritime security, safety, and regulatory enforcement. SAGA, that is India's vision and for geopolitical framework of maritime cooperation in the Indian Ocean region, apart from security, includes the development of maritime resources, support capacity building, and resource sharing. You have actually brought up all these elements very elaborately in your own presentation, so I won't go into those details. But in the overall context, from the legal point of view, I must submit that any activity, whether it be strategic, whether it be security related, or whether it be resource related, relating to blue economy, it is important that they should be done under a legal framework. Now, there is an existing legal framework which is contained in the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which is generally referred to as UNCLOS. And there are related elements to UNCLOS also, which are also applicable, which I am not at the moment going into details. Now, the major issue that arises now is the current existing legal framework adequate to deal with international scenario that is at present and the rapidly advancing scientific discoveries and technological developments? Are these things married together? Is the legal framework outdated? The underwater domain awareness is relatively a new subject and requires a serious thinking because security involves use of advanced scientific knowledge as well as development of highly sophisticated technical devices and instruments. UNCLOS needs to be revisited and accommodate UDA because UNCLOS makes specific jurisdictional issues and sovereignty and sovereign rights. It is a legal framework that is covering all these areas of maritime jurisdictions. The important thing to note here is that the agenda of the third UN Conference on the Law of the Sea, way back, I'm talking about 1972, which in fact resulted in the 1982 United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, did not include the military uses of the sea in its agenda. So therefore, there were a number of issues that were related to the military uses of the sea were not discussed at the third UN Conference on the Law of the Sea, and therefore the convention that has come up, the 1982 Convention on the Law of the Sea, which is considered as the constitution for the oceans, really includes only certain aspects of uses of the seas, like movement of warships, or when it comes to navigation or territorial sea or other jurisdictional aspect. The spatial delimitation of areas like the territorial sea, exclusive economic zone, continental shelf, and the area beyond the continental shelf being the international seabed area. That has been covered under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, and it really does bring about a lot of peace and security. But one thing that needs to be noted now, with considering all the developments that are taking place, and there is a thinking going on in some areas on this, is that the maritime jurisdictions until today have been addressed in terms of distance and from the coastal baselines, as well as the area covered in square miles or square kilometers, whatever it is in square units. A new thinking that is emerging involves the volume covered in the coastal state jurisdiction beyond national jurisdiction, beyond the territorial sea. Now, how far is this going to be applicable? How far the legal framework will change? And the very concept of sovereignty and sovereign rights would have a dramatic change if such kind of concepts are included there. And, I haven't done much of work on this, but I've been looking at some of the things, the developments that have been taking place. UNCLOS incidentally uses the depth criteria in several places, and it uses geometry in delimitation and delineation also of the continental shelf and other areas in the convention, including the area beyond the limits of national jurisdiction, allocation of areas for seabed exploration, exploitation, etc. That is about the deep sea mining. In the context of ocean resources, the need to revisit UNCLOS was already realized. And therefore, we have seen that in some areas like such as the marine biodiversity or genetic resources, or even deep sea mining, because it is coming as various regulatory things coming out of the International Seabed Authority's work, there have been very many deviations from the traditional UNCLOS provisions. How far are these going to affect the interests of developing countries? Particularly because the developing countries stand to benefit a lot from UNCLOS, and they insist in all international conferences that any new framework must be coming under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. That's a different discussion that is going on. For BIMSTEC, both security concerns and management of resources are of immense importance. Addressing security issues that includes non-traditional challenges requires unified regional vision, institutional and regulatory framework, which I think the previous speakers have already elaborated it much better. In respect of blue economy resources, which includes ocean, fish, other living resources, minerals, non-living resources under the submarine areas, seabed and subsoil, energy from water, currents and winds, marine organisms, and genetic resources. And there are several others that need to be harnessed itself. But then, in terms of these resources, a cooperation or a regional mechanism or regional cooperation can be envisaged even under the present framework, but then some more elements have to be brought in here. Now, as I mentioned, resources, when in exploration and exploitation of resources also has an inherent element of security involved in that. And that, of course, will have to be dealt with in a different fashion because the provisions of the convention there here very clearly outdated. Now, I must mention about something that was done way back in 2015. The Federation of Indian Chambers of Commerce had set up a 16-member task force to look into the issues of blue economy. Now, and focused on the business potentials for India and its international partners. Now, thereafter, they brought out first report, which was mainly focused on India's perspective and India's business opportunities and India's, possibility of economic benefits from oceans and related issues. FICCI thereafter constituted a 6-member core group out of the task force and brought out a second report. And the second report contained a wider perspective, and it included lots of takeaways for partner nations, including the regions and the other areas. It is a very exhaustive report. I was privileged to be a member of the task force as well as the core group. And I noticed that both these reports are very exhaustive, very focused, and very clearly identify areas of cooperation. And it also identifies the areas of, where new initiatives may have to be taken. I therefore feel that these two reports are of valuable contributions made. Lastly, in the context of Indo-Sri Lanka, let me first say that, in respect of maritime jurisdictions, in respect of exercising any area there, there is an important element, and that is called delimitation or delineation. Delineation refers to the delineation of the continental shelf, whereas delimitation refers to the bilateral and the regional issues about limiting the outer limits of jurisdictions. Now, in respect of Sri Lanka and India, there is a provision that is of utmost importance, and that is about the determination of the outer limits of the continental shelf, that particularly in the southern part of the Bay of Bengal. These provisions are contained in an annex to the final act of the Third UN Conference on the Law of the Sea. Now, this is not an integral part of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea itself, but indirectly, the very statement of understanding that was put up in the Annex 2 of the final act has a reference in the body of the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, where the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf is expected to apply the statement of understanding in respect of delineation of the outer limit of the continental shelf. This is particularly applicable to Sri Lanka and India. Sri Lanka's submission before the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf is already under consideration, and we have to see how the Commission has interpreted these provisions and what is exactly the legality of this issue. One of the major issues that arise is whether this provision is applicable to other areas in the world which may face similar geological or geomorphological conditions. Now, this is an issue which is a political issue, and there is likely to be some debate on this. Now, oceans indeed, having said all this, I would submit that oceans indeed is a very vast subject, and there are several institutions involved in this. Several initiatives have been taken up on issue-based things, like, for example, when we see the work of the UNEP or work of the FAO or work of IMO, they're all available. Lots of data and information is available, but the thing is, they are all scattered. All of them become very relevant when we are talking in terms of one particular comprehensive unified mechanism. That is not existing. And that part of it is important because we are going from the normal conventional issues to other issues. For example, deep sea mining is going to be a reality. We have reached this place from prospecting level to exploration contracts, which have gone to almost 20 years of exploration contracts given, which is likely to now go into the exploitation stage. There are several countries involved in that. There are, I think, nearly about 30 exploration contracts given, and nearly about, I think, 150 multinationals involved in deep sea mining, etc. But the deep sea mining may not be a reality right now. But we have to look ahead and see how these regulations that are being formulated, which is all, as you mentioned very clearly, with those people who have the technology and information, are they the ones going to get the seabed resources issues done, or are going to be countries like India, for example, which was one of the pioneer investors, which is recognized as the first pioneer investor? How are they going to benefit from these contracts? How are these contracts being framed? What are the legal issues involved in all these contracts? These are matters of very sort of technical issues. They are very strict, complicated legal nuances involved in that. I won't go into those details, but I just wanted to highlight that these are also matters which are of importance to study. I would close here. I thank you very much for the opportunity to speak on a legal issue, which of course always is a mundane subject, but in any way, it becomes very relevant too. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you very much. I would now request Admiral Ravindra C. Vijay Gunaratne, sir. He is a former commander of the Sri Lankan Navy and the former Chief of Defence Staff of the Sri Lankan Armed Forces. He retired as a naval officer and former Chief of Defence Staff in 1960. Born in 1962, he was educated at the Royal College, Colombo, 1969. Graduating, he enlisted in the Sri Lankan Navy as an officer cadet and part of the 9th intake at the Naval and Maritime Academy, Trincomalee. He would go on to follow a sub-lieutenant technical course and specialize in anti-submarine warfare in India, and followed a staff course at Pakistan Navy War College. Later, he gained a BSc in War Studies from the University of Karachi and graduated from the National Defence University and National Defence College, India, and then obtained an MPhil in Defence and Strategic Studies at the University of Madras. He has also served as the Commander of the Sri Lankan Navy, Chief of Staff of the Sri Lankan Navy, the Director General of the Sri Lankan Coast Guard, and held at various times 4 of the 7 naval commands in the Sri Lankan Navy. He has also served as the Director, Naval Operations, and is a recipient of the Virodhara Vibhushanaya. Sir, the floor is yours, sir. Admiral, sir.
Dr. Das, thank you for inviting me. I hope that I'm clear to everybody.
We can hear you, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is a privilege to be here in this web seminar on underwater domain awareness, jointly organized by the Pathfinder Organization of Sri Lanka and Maritime Research Center of India. I was allocated with 10 minutes. I will stick to that. At the end of my presentation, I will try to give some of my ideas on underwater domain awareness being a for regional growth and prosperity is the topic that which was given to me. The India and Sri Lanka are very close countries divided by 24 nautical miles. So India and Sri Lanka is very close countries divided by a Oak Strait, which is only 24 nautical miles, and the Adams Beach between Dhanushkodi in India and Kalaman and Sri Lanka has sand dunes and islets of chain, which are very shallow waters with the tidal waves. These islets change, so no ships other than the small fishing craft can cross this area. Therefore, the ships moving from east to west or to west to east of India has to go around Sri Lanka. Oak Strait and Pork Bay is the enclosed sea, which is very rich fishing ground with large stocks of fish and prawns. Next. The Indian economic growth has helped Sri Lanka for growth and prosperity. Main harbour in Sri Lanka, the Colombo harbour, has become a hub port of the region due to handling of transshipment containers, especially from India. The Colombo harbour handled around 7 million 20 equal units, that is 20-foot containers, transshipment on India and other regional countries. The Colombo is a harbour which can handle triple E ships. Triple E means economical, fuel efficient, and environmental friendly, and they are large container carriers of the world which can carry more than 18,000 TEU and 400 meters in length and more than 15 meters in draft. Renowned Indian shipping company Adani Group has invested and developing in the development of the operating the western terminal of New Colombo Port is a welcome signal. However, as Colombo running at almost full capacity of its container traffic, and you can see the traffic density on the left side, the right side of the slide. The present container terminals are not sufficient to handle the cargo which is coming from India. They are running at almost 100% capacity. So with the Adani's Colombo West International Container Terminal, which queue length of more than 1,400 meters and alongside berth of 20 meters, will allow ultra light, ultra larger container carriers to berth, to aim and load and process. And we are aiming at about 3.5 million 20 equal units on the transshipment terminal. Ports are increasingly viewed as strategic assets than more commercial assets. The India's footprint in Sri Lanka is a very important event with the Chinese presence in the Colombo harbour. With ever expanding Indian economy and the important imports and exports, but I am still of the view that present Colombo port development will not be sufficient to handle containers from India in 2030. The Indian exports increase almost 46% during last 2 years. Therefore, India should be favorably think of developing Visakhapatnam harbour without further delays and commission it by at least by 2030. Next. India and Sri Lanka has already taken initiative to have a large maritime cooperation. The trilateral maritime cooperation agreement, which signed between India, Sri Lanka, and Maldives on 6 March 2014, when Sri Lankan President Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa was Defence Secretary, was enhancing the already existing mutual cooperation. With Colombo Security Conclave, which is now known as the Defence Conference, which had in 2022 in Mali. This expanded to maritime security, not only India, Sri Lanka, and Maldives, and for Mauritius and Seychelles, and Bangladesh willing to join it. Maritime domain awareness. This is the main topic to this agreement. Sharing details of white shipping, automatic identification system data has improved the maritime domain awareness picture in India's fusion center in Gurugram. Oil spill response and disaster relief coordination is the other factor covered in this agreement. Especially, all three countries are now purchasing compatible equipment for oil spill response, and they can pool them together in a major oil spill disaster. And the Indian Coast Guard is taking the lead as they have the ships and equipment which is capable of handling large oil spill disasters. Next. Example, major fire on board supertanker MT New Diamond carrying 270,000 metric tons of crude oil, which was sailing from Kuwait to India and caught fire southwest of Sri Lanka on 3rd September last year, was able to douse and then to tow the ship to safety without any major oil spill disaster. This was because of the agreement, trilateral agreement, what we had, and by doing the exercises together. The exercise Dosti is another exercise all these nations' coast guards will take part. Further, tabletop exercises, frequent visits has enhanced the cooperation between the two countries. Training of almost all the Sri Lankan naval officers on professional naval courses, from sub-lieutenant technical course to National Defence College course, is done by the Indian government with no cost to Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has bought 200-meter length offshore patrol vessels from Goa shipyard on the defence credit line extended by India. This is the largest warships India has built to any other country, providing 4,000-ton floating dock and supplying of 2 drone aircraft for maritime surveillance to Sri Lanka Navy and Sri Lanka Air Force is on the final stages of discussion. Further, $6 million support was given to upgrade the Maritime Search and Rescue Center in Colombo, known as MRCC, and it is already agreed and work is yet next to progress. With these developments and recent economic support by Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi's government to Sri Lanka to come out of the economic difficulties, highly appreciative by the Sri Lankan people and the Sri Lankan government. India can use the oil tank farm in Trincomalee to stock a strategic reserve of oil when the oil prices are low. It is important to note that Sri Lanka does not have any underwater detection or underwater data capabilities. Even a submarine is few meters away from Colombo harbor, one of the busiest harbors in the world. Sri Lanka Navy does not have capability to detect. Therefore, enhancement of the underwater domain awareness is a subject that India and Sri Lanka should jointly look into. With Bangladesh and Myanmar acquiring submarines and Australia's ambitious plan on acquisition of the nuclear submarines with new alliance with the UK, US, and Australia. When the Australian developed new submarine base next to Perth in the Western Australia, and Japanese support to lay underwater listening devices along the Andaman and Nicobar Sea chain with India, and these data are being passed to the fusion center in Gurugram via fiber optic cables coming from Vizag, are things that we are interested in to look into. And then already existing Pishuk, or the arrangement of lines which were developed by US and Japan on underwater surveillance, and then it is extending it to Andaman and Nicobar Sea, is what is another thing that we are looking at. So I am sure with Sri Lanka joining into UDA development in India is a win-win situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Admiral sir. Indeed, a very, very insightful presentation, and you brought out many very important aspects. Thank you very much for joining us and making such a insightful remark. Our next speaker, Ambassador Gurjeet Singh sir, a former diplomat. He's a former Indian diplomat with 37 years of experience. He has been the ambassador of India to Germany, Indonesia, and ASEAN, and Ethiopia, and the African Union, besides having been in crucial assignments in Japan, Sri Lanka, Kenya, and Italy. He was the Sherpa for the first two India-Africa summits and authored a well-received book, The Injera and the Paratha, on India and Ethiopia. He has also written books on India's relations with Japan, Indonesia, and Germany. He is an honorary professor of humanities at the Indian Institute of Technology, Indore, and chairs the CII Business Task Force on Trilateral Cooperation in Africa. He has regularly commented on current events on TV and in journals, and is associated with the social impact investment movement, and is working on expanding it in Africa along with other trilateral initiatives for B2B engagements. Ambassador Gurjeet Singh sir.
Thank you so much, Commander Arnab Das, and thank you for inviting me. And I compliment you for your quality of your presentation and for all the wonderful presentations I've heard today, from which I have learned a lot, particularly from the very eminent Sri Lankan colleagues that you have included in this program today. So today, I think we have sailed on placid waters in this webinar. So let me try and shake things up, much like the current which almost took me away when I was swimming on Christmas Day 1989 at Triton Beach. And I'll never forget that, how the current pulls you underground when you can't even see it, the hidden enemy. The hidden enemy in all the good intentions that I've heard today is strategic trust. So what is BIMSTEC? BIMSTEC is not a power organization. It is a functional organization, like ASEAN and like SAARC should have been till it lost track. Now, BIMSTEC has no power elements, which means that India, as the largest country, which can be the locomotive for it, is actually going slow, so that none of the neighboring countries feel overwhelmed by it. The net result, to put it bluntly, is that BIMSTEC doesn't move because the locomotive is very shy of moving it. It is thinking too much about what the bogies will think, whereas the bogies do not have their own generative capacity. Second, when you look at the members of BIMSTEC, the two ASEAN countries are frail democracies, mostly under military rule, Myanmar and Thailand. But within the South Asian part, most of the members are democratic. Third, India has very few problems with the two military regimes in Myanmar and in Thailand. But it is our fellow democracies who often give us more trouble than we are accustomed to. Fourth, when you look at the summit coming up on 30th March, I think in Colombo, now likely to be held virtually, and I really hope it happens because I think BIMSTEC needs to move. The two important things which will get signed, one is the charter, which means the values that BIMSTEC subscribes to will be commonly accepted. That is very important for mutual trust. The second is the Convention on Connectivity, which means how do you connect the countries of the BIMSTEC? Now, theoretically, BIMSTEC is countries around the Bay of Bengal who have very little to frankly do with each other. Notionally, culturally, we have a history and immense potential. But the reality is we don't do much. Now, when you come to connectivity, there are two strands of connectivity working. One is the Kaladan multimodal project which India is doing with Myanmar, and the other is the trilateral highway between Northeast India, Myanmar and Thailand. And there is the lateral one called the BBIN, the Bangladesh, Bhutan, India network, which will one day lead to roads and other connectivity. So who gets left out of this connectivity is Sri Lanka, because it is the only island country not connected by land to any other BIMSTEC member. So we have to deal with Sri Lanka separately. And frankly, India does. India treats Sri Lanka as part of its Indian Ocean policy. So therefore, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mauritius and Seychelles are all part of the Indian Ocean Division of MEA for the last 3 years. So that is the importance of Sri Lanka. Now, when I talked about strategic trust, unless you have strategic trust, you can have as many conventions as you like. Whether it is UNCLOS, which Dr. Rajan spoke so eloquently about, or you have the India-Sri Lanka agreements, which our colleagues have spoken about, or you have many other things. But none of them will work unless there is total trust. Now what happens is that over the last 2 decades at least, India has ceased to be the predominant power in South Asia because of the economic rise of China. And today our neighbors feel the necessity to go to China for larger economic support than India is able to offer them. Fair, I have no issue with that at all. Secondly, many of our neighbors who are friendly to us have large defense acquisitions from China. Still, I have no problem with that. But some of my neighbors with whom India has land borders and India has insurgents on the other side, do not use the proximity to China to poke India using those insurgents. So therefore, they take care of India's economic interests by giving you a level playing field. So if Myanmar has the Chinese developed port, they will have an India developed port. Same with Bangladesh. They will buy defense equipment from China, but they will not promote insurgencies across the border. So this creates a level of comfort that India, despite what happened in Myanmar, is quite willing to live with the military regime because this broad framework is not being upset. Some of our other countries in the region today are not being seen with so much trust in India. I put it to you that this old philosophy that, oh, I am the big brother, I will always trust my younger brother, I don't think it holds true anymore. Today, trust is transactional. You trust me, I trust you. You show me the trust and I will show you the trust. I think India needs that confident handshake from our members of BIMSTEC. Next point, if you read the joint statement when Prime Minister Kishida came to India last week, you see he talks about continuing the joint project in Bangladesh. No more is Myanmar mentioned, no more is Sri Lanka mentioned. I need not say more. India is discomforted with China in South Asia. India therefore welcomes alternative powers to be harnessed so that China can be countered. That is why Japan, Australia, the US, Korea, whoever, the Quad, all are welcome. And so are our neighbors. But if China is given a leg hold to the detriment of India, then UDA, MDA, trust, blue economy, nothing is going to work, I tell you. Because today India is committed to safeguarding itself and will take therefore appropriate countermeasures. That is the demand of the Indian public opinion. So every country around us need not believe that by associating with China, they become the same level of China. If you learn, so when I was in Sri Lanka, we started this idea of the Colombo port where transshipment will take place. And I think that was mentioned by the Admiral from Sri Lanka. And I think that has worked very well. Almost 40% of Indian transshipment takes place in Colombo port. The idea was that this will integrate you economically and create levels of trust. I ask you, did it? Now, let me give you a more eloquent example. Germany and Russia have a very strong energy relationship, almost 60% energy imports. Idea was that this will bring you into an integrated security paradigm which will not get upset because you're economically interlinked. And Ukraine happened. Now, what is the lesson of Ukraine? You need to be careful who your friends are. First, make friends with your neighbors because they are the ones who march into you and all your friends sit back and say, come on guys, fight it on. So I think strategic trust, connectivity and working together for the betterment of our people in a matrix which is not only economic and functional but also strategic is the way forward for BIMSTEC to succeed. BIMSTEC is not a strategic organization, but it will not succeed unless it has a strategic congruence behind it. Thank you. I hope I have stirred the currents of this webinar adequately. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It was definitely frank and you brought out some very important points and I do appreciate you making those comments. Thank you very much, sir. We come to the end of today's webinar, and as our co-partners in hosting this event, I would request Chairman Pathfinder Ambassador Gunatilake sir to make his last comments. Maybe a couple of minutes he would like to wrap up the whole event and whatever comments he would like to give at the end. Ambassador Gunatilake sir.
So thank you very much indeed, Dr. Das. very happy that we were able to have this interaction with a group of people who are very much interested in strategic relations as well as ocean-centric matters. I hope we will be able to continue this interaction through discussions in the future as well. During the course of the discussion, we had the opportunity to listen to very important matters relating to India-Sri Lanka, the potential for India-Sri Lanka to do business together, or at least the future of our interaction in that regard, plus the importance of strategic relationship. I think Ambassador Singh was making very interesting remarks with regard to the strategic trust. From our point of view, I think it is a very important statement. If you do not have trust, it will be very difficult for two countries or two groups of people or two individuals to interact in a cooperative and a friendly manner. So we hope in the future we will be able to develop the level of trust. Sri Lanka is going through a difficult time right now, and we are very pleased that India has come forward to assist us in these difficult times. And of course, such action promotes not only the friendly relations, but also the trust a country places on another country when they come forward for support, providing support when they are facing a difficult situation. Coming back to our subject of underwater awareness, it's very true. We know more about the moon, or much more about the planet Mars than what we know about our own oceans. It's a very strange kind of situation, but that is the fact. And the more we go or delve into the subject, we know the importance of understanding and interacting with our oceans, and also the importance of knowing what is going on there for the future of our mankind, taking into consideration 70% of our global space is covered by water. So basically, this is a new area of interest for us. We are happy that the Maritime Research Center has taken up this interest over the interesting area of underwater domain awareness. And in the coming years or coming months, we hope to improve our knowledge on the UDA through interactions of this nature. And on behalf of Pathfinder Foundation, I would like to thank the center as well as Dr. Das for the interactions what we have started, and we hope that we will be able to continue this kind of interactions in the future as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. I truly appreciate Pathfinder coming forward to collaborate with us and start this initiative. And thank you very much for the invite. I'll be in Sri Lanka in May to sign the MOU and take things forward. I must also put on record His Excellency Milinda Moragora, sir, the High Commissioner of Sri Lanka and India, for facilitating this whole initiative and personally being involved right from the beginning. And I would like to thank the speakers today, starting with Mr. Pratap Heblikar, sir, to open the webinar, followed by Ambassador Gunatilake, sir. Then we had Dr. Vijay Sakuja, sir, Admiral Muralidharan sir, he has always been very kind and always encouraged me to take things forward and participated wherever we have requested him. Admiral from Sri Lankan Navy, thank you very much, sir, for being very kind and joining us today. Unfortunately, Professor Vasanta could not join from Sri Lanka Ocean University. We had Sanjay Vishwanath sir giving the industry perspective. HP Rajan sir, again, somebody who has been very kind and encouraged us and always participated whenever we have requested, even in short notice. Ambassador Gurjeet sir, thank you very much. At very short notice, you agreed to join us, and thank you very much for bringing those points. And I think very important. I mean, any relation, we have to be very clear what we want to do and how we want to go forward. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us and making very, very frank remarks, and we really appreciate, sir, and I'll continue to engage with you and seek your guidance in taking things forward. Thank you very much, everybody. The audience has been very kind. We had some very senior people in the audience also, as always. Captain Sarup Bangara, sir, thank you very much for being there always and encouraging us. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I cannot name everybody in the audience, but I always thank you for joining us. And a lot of young students have joined, and we appreciate that, because that is something very, very important, because we need to take this forward in the long term. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you very much.